Chapter 7. The first view of Lake Marlow was always exciting, and everyone on the bus was anticipating it. The highway peaked over a steep hill, and suddenly, spread below it, were the beautiful blue waters that stretched a mile wide and seemed to run forever to their source. The lake was surrounded by rolling hills, and a long earthen dam ran half mile to the east and kept the water contained. Because it was a state park, there had been no development along the shores. No houses, condos, marinas, no clutter. The lake was lined with narrow beaches, rocky points, and secluded bays. It was a perfect place for a bunch of Boy Scouts to get lost in the great outdoors over a long weekend. There were dozens of campsites around the lake, and of all varieties. The choices ran from fancier places with slabs and sewers and electrical hookups for recreational vehicles, all the way down to the primitive sites tucked away on far sides of the lake. With Major Ludwig at the wheel, the Troop 1440 bus always headed to the same spot, a site known as Enid Point, far away from the dam and the more civilized areas. Theo had earned his camping merit badge months earlier. A requirement was to keep a camping diary, which he had checked the night before. In his 2 years as a Boy Scout, he had spent 21 nights at Lake Marlow, either under the stars in perfect weather or in a pup tent when things were damp and cold. The previous summer, the troop had camped at Enid Point for consecutive nights. Various fathers, including Mr. Boone, had hauled in food and supplies. It had been a magical week, and Theo had been terribly saddened when the adventure was over. He still dreamed of it often. During the dreary day at school, he would gaze through the windows, see the hills in the distance, and remember those wonderful carefree hours when he and the other scouts roamed around the lake hiking, backpacking, and studying nature. They spent hours on the water, working on merit badges for swimming, rowing, and lifeguarding. The major held classes on first aid, cooking, and at night astronomy. The days were lazy, but the major was always pushing the boys to learn and achieve more. The first class scouts were pushed to achieve the rank of star, then life, then eagle. There were currently 120 merit badges in the book. You shouldn't stop until you have at least half of them, the major was fond of saying. 60 merit badges? It seemed impossible. Truman, a 15-year-old Eagle Scout who led the Warthog Patrol for 3 years and was the finest scout in the troop, had earned 47 merit badges. His sash was heavily decorated and the envy of every kid in the troop, but the major gently challenged him to do more. Theo had already decided that in addition to either a lawyer or a judge, he would definitely be a scoutmaster. He knew the job paid nothing, but if the major could do it and do it so well, then he could certainly try. The bus bounced along a gravel road and worked its way slowly up and down the hills, covered in thick trees and undergrowth. As they retreated from civilization, it usually took 30 minutes from the first sighting of the lake to their first arrival at Enid Point. The gravel turned into dirt, and Theo could not help but remember a camping adventure here when heavy rains washed out the road and the troop was stranded for an extra day. That was the same trip when most of the pup tents began sliding downhill in the mud, and the boys had to scurry to the bus before they nearly froze. At the time, it was a nightmare, but now the story seemed funny and it was retold often. Luckily, Enid Point was deserted. There were no other campers. The troop had reserved a large section, but other campers usually complicated matters. The major huddled with the five patrol leaders and laid out the campsite. The tents and supplies were quickly unloaded as 38 scouts hustled about. It would be dark in an hour, and as usual, the patrol leaders wanted the tents up and organized by dark, with dinner on the grill. Around the central fireplace, the five patrols laid out their tents in neat rows, like spokes on a wheel. Each two-man pup tent was identical to the others and pitched exactly 4 feet away from the next. The major believed in strict organization and expected the campsite to be as perfect as possible. Theo and the other leaders went through the duty rosters and assigned tasks. Friday's dinner was always a quick one, and by dark, the boys were bunched around a campfire, eating hot dogs and marshmallows roasted over open flames. Mr. Bennett of the Old Goats Patrol smoked a pipe, and a fragrant smell wafted over the campsite. Mr. Hogan, Al's father, began telling ghost stories and proved quite talented. By the third one, a detailed account of a headless axe murderer last seen somewhere around Lake Marlow. Scouts were huddling even closer together. It was a troop ritual that the fathers were expected to handle the telltales that naturally came with campfires. And, of course, the goal was to terrify the boys as much as possible. A favorite nighttime hike was along a rocky path that bordered the shore of the lake. After dinner and ghost stories, flashlights were unpacked, and the major led the troop for a long, casual walk. They stopped on a sandy point with waves lapping the shore and looked above. There was a half moon, and because of clouds, almost no stars. The major said they would try again on Saturday night. At 10, they were back in camp and preparing for the night. Sleep was always difficult at the first night. There was too much excitement at being in the woods, away from home, tucked into a warm sleeping bag, in a small tent, with the sounds of crickets chirping and frogs croaking and deer snorting. Theo and Woody talked and listened to the murmurings from the other tents. They could hear the men, the old goats, talking and laughing by the campfire. Every half hour or so, the major would patrol the site and tell the boys to quiet down and get some sleep. Eventually, they did. Theo woke early and eased out of his sleeping bag. He put on his hiking boots and managed to crawl out of the pup tent without waking Woody, who appeared to be dead to the world. The sun was barely up, the air was crisp and cool, and the men were drinking coffee over a roaring fire in the center of the campsite. The major had a pot of hot cocoa on the grill, and he poured Theo a cup. Why did it always taste so much better outdoors? Other scouts staggered over, all wiping sleep from their eyes and unaware of how wild their tent air really looked. They were boys. Who cared? Their mothers and sisters were miles away. Looks and hygiene were not important, not on a camping trip. They had no plans to bathe or brush their teeth until they got home, though the major would remind them of these necessities. As the troop slowly came to life, there was more and more talk of breakfast. Before long, the smell of bacon sizzling over an open fire filled the air. For the Falcon Patrol, Theo, who had already earned his cooking merit badge, was helping Philip work on his. Philip was in charge of preparing breakfast for the 8 Falcons, both Saturday and Sunday, and had planned the menu in detail. For Saturday, it was scrambled eggs, link sausage, and jam on wheat bread, grilled in a skillet. Philip cooked over a low impact fire as Theo supervised, and the rest of the patrol scoured the area for firewood. The major stopped by for a friendly reminder about the importance of campsite sanitation. After breakfast and cleanup, the troop divided into small groups. Truman, an Eagle Scout, left on a 20-mile hike with 5 others, all pursuing their hiking merit badge. Gavin, a 16-year-old Eagle, and the oldest guy there, left with 3 others in 2 canoes for a trip across Lake Marlow and back, a voyage that was expected to take 8 hours. Other groups worked on the basics of camping, first aid, nature, and fishing. Hardy had explained to the major that he and Theo needed a short private conversation with him, and during a lull in the activities, the three managed to ease away from the campsite. They hiked for 10 minutes, climbed a small hill, and found a secluded spot on a rocky ledge with a great view of the lake. Hardy wasted no time. He launched into a history of his family's farm and described with great feeling how much it meant to him. He explained how the bypass would destroy not only the farm, but a lot of his family's history. His grandparents would be forced to move. He argued that the Boy Scouts had the duty to protect nature and the outdoors, and the entire scouting handbook was filled with notions of conservation and protection of the environment. He wanted the entire troop, indeed all 3 of the different scout troops in Strattonburg, to get organized and fight the bypass. Theo just listened and nodded when needed. He could tell Hardy's sincere plea was not being well received by the major. When Hardy finished, the major said, I understand how you feel, but this is not a project for us. Based on what I've read and heard, this is something the politicians are fighting for. The governor wants to bypass. Some state senators north and south of Strattenburg want to bypass. Our local leaders are not sure, but they will be forced to make the decision. But it's not right and it's not fair, Hardy insisted. How can the state take their property for a bad project? The major smiled and pointed. Look at this beautiful lake, Hardy. It was not created by nature, no sir. He pointed to another spot, sort of in the center of the lake. Out there in the middle, it's about 200 feet deep. There used to be a town near, a very small town called Coldwater. The Enid River ran through the center of the town. Every 5 years, the river would rise and eventually flood. It was not just the town of Coldwater. It was a wild river with a history of chaos. It would flood for miles up and down this valley. The farmers and landowners lost their crops, homes, and businesses, and they complained for decades about the flooding. Finally, about 60 years ago, the state decided to build a dam, tame the river, and stop the flooding. They created this lake. Herbert Marlowe was the governor back then. He pointed to the dam far in the distance and barely visible. But guess what? Many of the people who lived around here did not want to give up their land. In spite of the flooding, in spite of everything, they fought the project. They hired lawyers and went to court and did everything possible to stop the dam. It took years. Have you heard the term eminent domain? Theo explained it to me, Hardy replied. Without the right of eminent domain, the state could not have built this lake. One landowner could have blocked the entire project, and flooding would have continued. Without eminent domain, there would be no dams, lakes, highways, state parks, canals, ports, lots of things, Hardy. It's not pleasant when you're on the bad end of the eminent domain, but it's important for society as a whole. But this project was necessary. The bypass is not. There are a lot of these who think it is. It's shaping up the nasty fight, and the Boy Scouts have no business in the middle of it. If you think it's wrong, then you should fight as hard as possible. Get involved. According to the newspaper, there are several groups already lined up to oppose the bypass. Use your energy there, but leave the troop out of it. Theo was not surprised at the major's position. The bypass smacked the bypass smacked of politics. There was no place for the scouting. They hiked back to the campsite where a long swim was being organized. That's the end of chapter 7.